Everyone thinks Flight 19 vanished into the Bermuda Triangle's supernatural void. The real story is far worse. On December 5, 1945, 5 U.S. Navy bombers took off from Fort Lauderdale, Florida at 2:10 p.m. for a routine training mission. They never came back. 78 years later, we're still told they simply disappeared, swallowed by the triangle, victims of magnetic anomalies lost to interdimensional rifts. The mythology is irresistible. But here's what actually happened: a series of discrete, survivable decisions made under pressure that compounded into catastrophe. No magic required. Flight 19 consisted of 5 Avenger torpedo bombers, each carrying a crew of 3. The flight leader was Lieutenant Charles Carroll Taylor, a seasoned pilot with 500 hours logged. He'd flown this exact training route, a triangle over the Atlantic, dropping practice bombs dozens of times. His wingmen trusted him. Their families were waiting. The Navy had given them one job: navigate to Bimini, drop ordnance, navigate home. Simple arithmetic. At 3:45 p.m., roughly an hour and a half into the flight, Taylor radioed back to Fort Lauderdale. His voice was steady but carrying the first note of concern. Both compasses had failed. He couldn't determine his position. The ocean below looked wrong, unfamiliar. He'd expected to see the Bahamas. Instead, there was only water. The radio operator at base, Lieutenant Robert Cox, made a decision: keep Taylor talking, keep him calm, gather data. Here's where the accepted story diverges from reality. The mythology says Flight 19 was lost in a zone of inexplicable forces. The truth is simpler and more human. Taylor made a navigation choice under incomplete information, and it was almost certainly wrong. His compasses weren't malfunctioning, they were working fine. He'd flown west when he should have flown south. The math was against him before the engines even started. The Avengers carried enough fuel for about 5.5 hours of flight. At 3:45, they had roughly 2 hours of fuel remaining. Taylor could have ditched in the ocean, then 5 planes in formation, 5 chances for rescue. The water was choppy but not impassable. Instead, he chose to keep flying. He chose to search for land. He chose to believe his compass had failed rather than accept his own error. Over the next 2 hours, Taylor's transmissions grew more frantic. His radio operators at base heard him attempting different headings, different theories, different desperation. One pilot broke formation and attempted to fly south on his own. The others stayed with Taylor. Loyalty, protocol. The cost of that choice: 14 men, 14 families who would spend decades wondering what happened. At 4:25 p.m., Taylor transmitted, "We are on the line north and south." He believed he was over the Florida Keys. He wasn't. He was somewhere in the Atlantic, north of the Bahamas, with roughly 40 minutes of fuel. The decision tree had collapsed. Every option remaining was bad. Ditch now in darkness with no rescue coordinates, or fly until the engines quit and hope for a miracle. At 4:45 p.m., Taylor made his final transmission: "We are running north and south." Then silence. The planes had ditched. In daylight, with preparation, ditching 5 bombers in formation might have worked. In darkness, running on fumes, it was a catastrophe. The Navy launched a search and rescue mission immediately. They found nothing. No wreckage, no bodies, no evidence. But here's where the real story begins. A Navy flying boat, a PBM Mariner, was dispatched to search for Flight 19 that same evening. 23 crew members aboard. It took off at 7:27 p.m. and was never heard from again. Now we had 6 aircraft missing, not 5. 14 men dead became 37. The mythology needed an explanation. The Bermuda Triangle was born. The official Navy inquiry, completed in 1946, was blunt. Flight 19 was lost due to disorientation and fuel exhaustion. Taylor's compasses worked fine. His navigation was faulty. The PBM Mariner likely exploded during takeoff, a known hazard with that aircraft. Mechanical failure, not mystery. The Navy said so in writing, but the public wanted something more compelling. In the 1960s and 70s, writers began reframing Flight 19 as paranormal. Compasses malfunctioning, instruments spinning wildly, a zone of impossible physics. They claimed the Navy covered up the truth. They invented details. They sold millions of books. The actual decision, a pilot's fatal error under pressure, was too mundane, too human, too culpable. The triangle myth was more profitable. The real cost of Flight 19 wasn't supernatural. It was strategic. The loss of 5 combat-ready bombers, 37 trained airmen, and the Navy's confidence in a routine training protocol. The decision to keep flying instead of ditch early. The decision to trust faulty navigation instinct over hard instrument data. The decision to stay in formation rather than scatter and maximize survival odds. Each choice was rational given what they knew. Collectively, they were fatal. What we know now: the Bermuda Triangle has no more disappearances than any other stretch of ocean. Magnetic anomalies don't exist there. The weather is severe but predictable. Flight 19 vanished because a skilled pilot made a navigational error under pressure, compounded that error through successive decisions, and ran out of fuel before he could correct course. The tragedy wasn't mystical, it was procedural. The Navy learned from Flight 19. They changed training protocols, improved navigation redundancy, and mandated ditching procedures. The cost in lives became a cost in policy. But for the families, 14 women, dozens of children, no policy change mattered. They lost someone to a decision made under pressure with incomplete information by a man doing the best he could with what he had. The Bermuda Triangle persists in our culture because it's easier to believe in forces beyond human control than to accept human fallibility. It's more comforting to imagine supernatural causes than to acknowledge that competent people under pressure with incomplete data can make decisions that cost everything. Flight 19 wasn't taken by the Triangle. It was lost by navigation, fuel, and the weight of command. The real mystery isn't what happened to Flight 19. The mystery is why we needed it to be a mystery at all. The answer, pilot error, fuel exhaustion, bad luck, human limitation, was documented and published. Yet we chose mythology instead. We chose the Triangle. Perhaps because accepting that decision under pressure can kill you, even when you're trying to do everything right, is harder to live with than accepting magic. Subscribe every week. We break down the real story behind maritime disasters the ocean wants to keep hidden.